Hello, and welcome to The Whole Equation. In late 1895, the first films began to appear. The black and white images, projected at 16 frames per second, thrilled audiences with the illusion of movement. These first film productions were simple, just a single shot, filmed on a static camera, with no sound, no story, and no editing. However, what started as a novelty soon became a new artistic medium as the first filmmakers created a new visual language. Close-ups, editing, the moving camera, as well as a whole range of tricks and techniques. Today, we will look at how this new medium came to be and the legacy of the men who became the first filmmakers. The first filmmakers to shoot and project a film for an audience were the Lumiere Brothers in 1895. These earliest films were single shots, with a fixed camera setup, filming everyday occurrences like workers leaving a factory. However, soon, because of the novelty associated with seeing the world on screen for the first time, cameramen were sent all over the world to capture scenic shots. Despite their role as technical innovators, the Lumieres made little contribution to film grammar. However, one of their cameramen, Eugene Promio, did capture this, which is the first shot taken with a moving camera. In this instance, it was placed on a Venetian canal boat. Films at this time were usually sold as a series of separate shots and rented to exhibitors who could show them in any order. But this changed, as perhaps the first great filmmaker appeared. Georges Méliès' films are possibly the most beautiful and most watchable of all of the early filmmakers. Méliès was one of the first narrative filmmakers and made films which told a whole story over a series of successive shots. An early example is the Dreyfus Affair, which was a series of 10 separate shots, each of which may have been sold as a separate film to exhibitors. However, in his next film Cinderella, Méliès' innovation was to combine all the shots into a single reel, which could then be sent to exhibitors. Méliès, himself a former magician, included many special effects in his films, all captured in camera. Women vanish, men lose their heads, and rockets are shot into the moon. Méliès achieved many of these effects by stopping and starting the camera, the first step towards film editing. However, Méliès used editing as a trick shot, rather than part of the language of filmmaking. Filmmakers at the time were concerned about editing within a scene, worrying it would jar with an audience accustomed to theatrical performance. Films in the early period usually positioned all the actors facing forward, with full shots of their whole bodies and a static camera filming the action as it might in a theatre. However, this began to change thanks to the English filmmaker George Albert Smith. George Albert Smith is perhaps the least remembered of these early filmmakers, but is in some ways the most important. Perhaps the earliest example of editing that we might recognise is in Grandma's reading glasses, where shots are combined to suggest how they might look through a pair of reading glasses. However, Within a couple of years, Smith was making films like Mary Jane's Mishap. The film starts with the usual full shot of Mary Jane, with the camera placed back from the actress. Smith then cuts to a closer view, what we might now call a medium shot. This wasn't a trick shot or a look through a lens, but a cut, whose only purpose was to better show the audience the action. Smith found that the audience could follow the story even with the change of perspective, and hence one of the most important aspects of film grammar was invented. Despite this, the close-up wasn't widely adopted until D.W. Griffith used it extensively in Birth of a Nation, over a decade later. Smith's work marked the first step towards what would become known as continuity editing, which would become the dominant style of editing in mainstream cinema. In continuity editing, the idea is that each shot should give the illusion of directly succeeding the last, avoiding jumps in space or time. So for example, in one scene, a character might reach for a doorknob, and then cut to the interior, showing the door opening. Smith's work in this regard is naturally relatively crude. For example, in these shots, the kittens change position before and after the cut. Continuity editing was still out of the grasp of the first filmmakers during this time. However, they were beginning to take steps in that direction. In Edwin S Porter's Life of an American Fireman, Porter cuts from a scene where the firemen slide down a pole, to another scene of the fire trucks being prepared. Sometime later, the firemen then enter down the poles. So while Porter maintains a spatial continuity of action, there's a temporal jump. Porter, who's often regarded as the first great American director, was for a long time thought to be the first director to include intercutting, that is, cutting between locations while the action takes place simultaneously. For example, in one extant version of The Life of an American Fireman, the fire inside the home is intercut with the action outside. However, in more recent years, it's been found that this is not the only version of the film to exist. It's likely that in the original release, Porter shot two scenes separately and placed one after the other. So the scene inside the home of the fireman's rescue is then succeeded by another scene of the fireman entering the home from the outside, repeating the action. This may seem an odd choice for a film, however, it was a common choice in the first films. Melies' famous shot of the rocket fired into the moon is succeeded by a shot from the moon showing the astronauts landing on the surface. Early audiences accepted these choices, and it would in fact be several more years before continuity editing became the standard for filmmakers. Unfortunately, these early pioneers of cinema would soon fade away. Porter, Melies, Smith would all be superseded by a new generation of filmmakers and film companies who would industrialize the filmmaking process. Nevertheless, these filmmakers took the first tentative steps towards the cinema we know today.